Hello, in this video we're going to look at part 2 of the listening paper in the Cambridge English First for Schools exam. Part 2 is the sentence completion task. You'll hear either an interview or a short speech about a topic, and you'll be given a series of notes that you have to complete with information from the listening. For this and the other examples that we're going to do in this series, you need the PDF file and the MP3 files that are linked to in the description below. So please make sure you have a copy of those ready if you haven't already. So we're on page 63, and we will hear a young man called Sam Conti telling a group of students about his job as a specialist chocolate maker. So what do you do before you listen? We have about 45 seconds, which is a long time to read through the sentences that you have to complete. Whilst you're doing that, the first thing is to think about the information needed to complete the sentence. On a basic level, what kind is it? Is it a noun? Is it going to be an adjective? Look at the grammar of the sentence. And if it's a noun, try to use your world knowledge to decide what kind of noun it is. Maybe you need to find a subject of study. You can start to think about which ones you know. Also, look for the most important parts of the sentence itself. Think about words like similar. So if you see in the sentence something is similar to something, you have to listen for a comparison in the listening. Listen for things like most difficult. If it says most difficult in the question, there will be several things that are mentioned, but one of them will be more difficult than the others, and that gives us the answer. If you have time, you can also start to think about the synonymous expressions that might appear in the listening that give you the general area that the answer will come from. The questions here will not appear in the same way in the listening. They will be changed somehow. The answers, though, need to be exactly what you hear. They also need to be grammatically correct. For example, if you see the indefinite article a before the gap, don't put a plural noun in the gap. Okay, so let's listen, complete your notes, and when you come back, we'll see what other lessons we can take from this experience. Okay, so for number 9, before becoming a chocolate maker, Sam chose law as his subject of study. If we look at the listening itself, he does talk about what his parents suggested. They suggested studying something like medicine or even economics. But then he said, I thought law might open more doors, so that's what I did. So we have a few distractions. The thing that he chose as his subject of study was law. For number 10, Sam uses the word complex to describe the process of growing cocoa beans. So here he says, I discovered that growing high-quality cocoa beans is a process that's not at all straightforward. In fact, it's a very complex one. Now he highlights this word by stressing it in the sentence. And when you have a question like Sam uses the word the word he uses will be stronger in the sentence so that it directs your attention to it. For number 11, Sam learned that cocoa beans are similar to grapes in the way the weather affects them. So obviously we were going to be listening for something related to plant life, maybe something else that could be used in making a drink. Grapes can be used for wine, or maybe something that could be eaten. And he does talk about that. He says, as a distraction, they are affected by changes in weather much more than other fruit like apples or bananas. We don't want that. That's not similar. The question says they are similar to. He says, in fact, the beans are more like grapes, really. So that gives us the answer. For number 12, Sam finds that the most difficult part of chocolate making is melting it perfectly. He says the hardest bit is melting it in precisely the right way, but cooling it correctly isn't easy either. So he's saying that cooling isn't easy, but the most difficult, the hardest bit is melting, and that's where we get the answer from for number 12. For number 13, you should be prepared to listen for vocabulary connected with sounds. And if you know much about chocolate, you might have predicted this answer. Sam can identify the quality of chocolate when he hears a sound he calls the snap. And again, it's marked in the listening by being stressed more strongly. He says, I want to hear the snap. If it makes that noise, it means it's good. So instead of sound from the question, it says noise in the listening. Sam uses a diary where he keeps a record of all his recipes for number 14. It says, another thing I like to do is write up my experiments. I keep a diary for this. So this one's a little bit more difficult perhaps because he explains what the diary is for before mentioning the word diary. He says, I keep a diary for this. So you have to remember what this refers to, looking back in the listening. And for number 15, Sam tries to make a chocolate without any bitterness in the flavour. So in your preparation for the listening, you would be thinking about a noun to fit in the gap. And we want a noun connected with flavour. So you would go through the different possible flavours that something can have. Sweetness, saltiness, bitterness perhaps. And that way you'd be ready for what you hear. In the listening, he says, I make a range of chocolates, but what I'm aiming for is a rich and rounded flavour without bitterness. So there we go. In 16, Sam says he gets his most original ideas while he is driving. He mentions other activities. He says to counter the calories from eating the chocolate, obviously, I go swimming and do a lot of running. But that's not connected with his ideas. Even then, chocolates aren't far from my mind. I actually come up with most of my strangest recipes when I'm driving. And that's where we get our answer from. Then for number 17, Sam gives the example of cheese as a chocolate flavour he unsuccessfully tried to sell. He talks about his fair share of disasters. So that's something that didn't work very well, like chocolate flavoured with cheese. And then finally, for number 18, Sam calls the place where he makes his chocolate his laboratory. It's not a very difficult word to pick out in the listening, but it might prove a difficult word to spell because the pronunciation kind of hides the letters a little bit. So he finishes by saying, I'd like to show you a short video clip that shows me actually making the stuff in my laboratory. So that's it. Remember those important tips. Look for the important information in the question. Think of other ways to express the words in the question, and then listen for the specific information in the listening itself. Beware of distractions, so answers that seem connected but then are not used in the question itself. In the next video, we'll be looking at part 3 of the listening paper, which is the multiple matching task. Until then, thank you.